So this is a Dodge Cummins 12 valve in a two-wheel drive 3/4 ton pickup, and I'd like to use that engine and transmission for another project. So this is actually a parts truck. So I've never pulled a Cummins out of a Dodge before, and that firewall, you see it actually hangs over the valve covers there quite a bit. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I'm trying to keep this lift chain as short as I can, so that it's not actually pulling up on the firewall, and because of that chain and hook configuration, I can actually move that hook over link by link. So I think I've got everything disconnected, so I want to start lifting now and then slowly watch to see if I've forgotten anything that still needs to be disconnected. The transmission, I've got the original drive shaft yoke cut off and stuck in the back of that transmission just to keep the oil in it. So I won't need that drive shaft, but it makes a nice handy plug to keep the oil in as that transmission gets tilted down like that. So I won't be able to lift the engine much higher. That's pretty well about it. And the engine mounts are not going to clear the frame, it looks like. So that side has to go quite a bit higher. And this side is up a little higher, but it still needs more. So fortunately, the engine mount is bolted fairly accessibly on the side here. See if I can show that. So there, you can see 1, 2, 3 bolts. I think there's just 3. So I'll take those 3 off, and I'll remove this engine mount, and maybe that'll be enough for me to slide the whole engine over this way and then clear that side. If not, then I'll have to remove both engine mounts off the frame. So that's what it looks like. So there's lots of room in here now on the driver's side. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to use this motorcycle tie down, and I'll pull on that. I'll put tension on that tie down as I get in between that other motor mount and start to move this whole thing over. So this is kind of like a two-hand operation here. So I'll work on that for a while and see if I can get this engine to kind of want to stay put a little bit more on this side to clear the passenger side motor mount, engine mount. Okay, I wasn't having success with that technique, so what I've done now is I've moved the chain over to this side and more to the front. So now I'm lifting, and then it's pulling the engine kind of a little bit over like that, and then I can see that looks like my tie down is getting looser, so I might be able to coax it over that way. This engine mount is a little harder to get at. That's why I'm trying to avoid that. I'd like to just pull it out and not have to worry about trying to get that mount off of there. Okay, so that wasn't working either, but there's enough room here now. I think I can work a little nicer to get that passenger side engine mount off the block. So that's the next step here. Okay, so now things are starting to get a little unusual. So I've got a floor jack down on the grass there, and it's going to be pushing up on a 2x4 which is right here. So the 2x4 is down on top of that floor jack, and the other end of this 2x4 is going to be lifting on the end of this wrench. It's kind of a tight spot down in here, and I can't really get a good leverage on it, so I'm going to use the floor jack to lift up on the end of the wrench. So I can't like get a good 1/2 inch ratchet with a nice socket on there, so I'm kind of stuck to using a wrench, but I don't have the leverage, and I can't, you know what I mean? Alright, so we'll see what happens. Now I have leverage. Let's see what happens. Oh, something's going. It's going up. Okay, I think that thing is loose now. Okay, so that worked well. 2 more bolts left to remove that engine mount off the block, and those I can access with a ratchet with an extension on there. And they're on there pretty tight, so I'm using a little extra leverage here. So this engine mount is loose now, but then I realize it's actually attached to a heat exchanger up here. I think I got my finger on it now. There's a heat exchanger right there, and it appears to be a heat exchanger to maintain transmission temperature. Alright, so now I have to separate this tank from the engine mount, and it looks like there are 2 bolts here, and I'll be able to separate that. I'll try that and see what happens. So now the engine seems nice and free, but that engine mount, I think I'm going to have to leave it down there in the frame, but that's okay. At least it's not holding the engine back from coming out. So the transmission is sitting on some 2x4 blocks, and so I'm going to knock those blocks out of there now. So the transmission is no longer on those blocks. Everything is hanging nice and loose. So what I want to do now is I'm going to pull the truck backwards over top of the 2x4s here. Got one on either side of the truck. So I think this engine is 100% ready to come out, except I ran into the next snag here. The oil pan here, the oil pan will not clear the frame cross member. See if I can get a better shot of that. Yeah, so from here, so there's the oil pan, and it's right up against the cross member there. So that's a bit of a hassle. And I can't really raise the engine anymore because I'm up against the firewall here. So the next plan, I'm going to start removing body mounts, or the bolts. So there's one here, and then one on this side. So that's 2. I'll remove those 2 bolts, and then there's one under the cab here somewhere. Same thing with the other side, and then the back 2 mounts, this one and the one on the other side, I think I just have to loosen those off. Okay, so that made considerable more room there by the firewall and that valve cover. So that oil pan, it's got some damage right there from a bolt, and I'll show you where that is. It also has some damage on the bottom side. Looks like it's been pushed in some. So on that cross member over here on the back side, there's a little bolt there, and that holds a brake line on that runs across from one side to the other. So this is the two engine mounts side by side, and here's the two bolts that held that tank on, and this is the area where I used a wrench. I couldn't get a ratchet in here. So there's quite a difference between those mounts, and I think on a four-wheel drive it would be more user-friendly to get that engine out of there, because the four-wheel drive I think has the cross member on the frame moved more forward, and it's somewhere in this area. So then that engine would be able to move forward more and help it to clear that firewall. Well, transmission. What else was I going to show you guys? Oh, here's that. So I cut that drive shaft off, say. I might pop this U-joint out of here yet. But these yokes are really handy for keeping the oil in. So here's that heat exchanger that I was talking about earlier in the video. Now it's easier to see. So the two transmission lines, they're hanging down the bottom, and the one on the side here is an engine coolant line, and the other end of the tank has the other engine coolant line. So right here.